This video is sponsored by Artistworks, but more on that later. For the people sitting at home, you reached out to me and you were like, "Hey man, you want to talk about Tony Rice?" And I said yes, and that's how we got here today.
That's right. I just saw some of the stuff you did about him and thought, well, yeah, it'd be great to connect, not only about Tony, but also just knowing how much of a teacher you are, and thought we could maybe draw a circle around some of that stuff.
I think you kind of bring a unique perspective because, and I told you this when we were on the phone, that, we've talked to Grisman. Of course, Grisman played with Tony and everything, but I think that dynamic was a little bit different. I mean, you lived with Tony Rice for a brief period, didn't you?
That's right. When I moved out to California, hoping to meet the Quintet, I came out in August. We immediately formed a bond and connected, and the music felt great. I lived there for about 6 months in a little one-bedroom apartment with him and his wife. And so it was a very intense experience on many levels, as you can imagine.
Did you get a chance to hear him practice, or was he just always listening to records like people talk about?
That's an interesting question. I never got to see him write tunes. Although he was very prolific at that time, he was coming up with tons of material. But yeah, he would present a song already kind of done. So I'm not sure when he did that. I think he must have done a lot of writing during the time when I left, went back to Florida, and then came back probably around Christmas time. I think Daryl was making his fiddleistics record and Tony was doing acoustics right at the same time. When I got back out there, after having been gone 3 months, all the material was ready to go. So he must have done a lot of it then.
Yeah, that's so interesting.
I'm not sure if he was a great practicer. I'm not sure if he spent a lot of time, or if he did, it was a real secret. Obviously he did, and he had it very worked out, many of his solos and just the way he intros to tunes and stuff, he worked a lot of that out.
When you were, hanging out with Grisman and all of those guys, it seems like there was a big burst of knowledge for all of you. You're all trying to figure out jazz music. You're all trying to put it together. You're hanging out with folks like Carlini. What were some of those revelations that you had? What were you guys learning and figuring out?
Okay, here goes take 3.
Well, the real book was an illegal publication at that point. It had just come out. And there were real basic changes to the standards in there. And it was all music that we loved, whether it was the swing stuff or the bebop or the post-bebop even. So we would look at these chords, and Grisman knew a little bit more than the rest of us, at least early on, what a flat 5 was. But it was... We used that as our learning tool, and just playing those tunes as a way to try and figure out what harmony was. It was a great experience, and then how to find it on a mandolin.
That's really interesting for me to hear, because for no one who's ever seen the real book, that is just notation. That's standard notation. If someone in the group was musically literate, someone could read. Because I don't think Tony did,
No, Tony didn't. David did. I did, and Daryl did. We were able to play the melodies, understand the rhythms, and we just dissected that stuff. Now, also, Daryl spent time going to the jazz camps at Stanford that were run by Jamie Abersol and David Baker. And David was a cello player at that point, so he really bonded with Daryl Anger. They were really investigating how jazz worked. There just weren't as many learning tools, at that point. The David Baker books were out. There was the scale syllabus in the front of his book on, what to play over what chord. And it was earn while you learn kind of experience. And we were writing tunes based on stuff we were hearing. And a lot of it, we didn't know what it was. We were just making those sounds. very interesting idea. Even the early jazz guys, when you say 2-5-1, sometimes they don't know what you're talking about. Did you ever hear this one where a D minor 7 to G7 to C? The D minor 7 in a previous generation was considered a 4 with a 6 in the bass.
Oh, yeah.
They were like, what are you talking about, 2-5-1? It's just 4-5.
Yeah, and that's how like a bluegrass musician would call it, right? You
Maybe
think
so.
like 4-5-1.
Right. We had to really learn this language, and I think a lot of it has gotten codified over the years.
Well, even more interesting is that this is I'm not trying to throw shade at you guys or anything, but you were just figuring it out, and you got stuff wrong. Ultimately, you created dog music. You created like a new genre, and the way that you guys interpreted what you learned about jazz has also been codified.
Which is kind of amazing and absurd. And I realize it all now, when I hear some of the stuff we were playing over top of changes. And now I teach it in a much more methodical way than I would just been playing at that point. Sure. Well, creativity is, sometimes it's based on isolation. If you just look at the great bluegrass players, how different they all sounded way back when compared to how they sound all the same now.
Right.
That's a very interesting how the music gets kind of funneled down and distilled down to this ideal of what we think of as perfect today.
And even the tunes, right? Even the tunes get more and more, like if you listen to Dan Crary's recording of Salt Creek, the very first thing he plays is like the beginning of Red Haired Boy, right? He doesn't play the drone like you expect guitar players to play, right? But now no one would do that. Everyone's going to play the drone. That's how you play Salt Creek, right? It's been...
Or what happened to walking bass in bluegrass? Why is that not okay now? All of a sudden, there was a ton of it in Bill Monroe's music,
I teach a lot of lessons just like you, and for instance, if I ask a student to play Billy and the Low Ground, I've heard the same 3 arrangements so many times. It's it's all Brian, it's all banjo band, it's all these places where you learn how to play bluegrass guitar, and that wasn't true 10 years ago. That wasn't true 15 years ago, maybe.
Yeah, well, everybody's entitled to their window in, to this music, and people copying my stuff. Hey, that's what I did. I played every Sam Bush solo on every recording I could find from the age 14 to 17 or 18. I remember consciously having that moment, though, where I said, okay, Sam Bush is Sam Bush. I got to not do that. And that was a struggle. Because if you're not going to do that, what are you going to do? And is it going to still sound within the style? And so that was a great turning point.
Like the kind of player that's maybe had to do that multiple times, in that you were also playing with David Grisman, doing like these twin mandolin things. I imagine that at some point, the line got blurry and you were like, am I Grisman, right? I've been doing this with you so closely for so long. Did you have that same feeling at that moment?
Of course, and that's when you start doing the teenage thing of elbowing your way through and out of your situation, being a bit, Daryl and I think we both got fired at the same time, officially. He could sense before we could that we were pushing it and do our own thing more. We were writing our own tunes, and you have to go through that period of complete dedication. And Grisman is a gigantic bright light when you're around him. I'm sure I mean, musically and personality-wise, he's just a magnet, And all of us got pulled into that, almost like a Mooney kind of, like a religious thing. Almost, we got completely hooked on the music and making the music our own, and it was the most important thing in our lives for all of those years that we were there.
You were with Grisman for Hot Dog, Quintet 80. Mondo, Mando.
Mando, yeah.
That's it? Was there one
I
more?
think or Doggrass Dog Jazz. I was on some of those with Earl Scruggs. And
That lineup changes a lot.
yeah, I mean, guys were...
Was that ever tense? Was that strange, for the band to
like
move
any
around that much?
band, it was like any band. Cats come in very fired up, happy to have the job, and then at a certain point start ruffling their own feathers or going in different directions. Mark O'Connor, of course, being such a great fiddler, here he was playing guitar in that band. So at a certain point, his violin playing took over, and I think he broke his arm, was how we ended up becoming a quartet. And I ended up taking over the guitar chair a week after that. So I had to learn all the music on guitar for a gig in Santa Cruz a week after his skiing accident.
According to one of my teachers, to Hayes Griffin, he said that the guitar solo you play on Dog Funk, he said that's the funkiest bit of flat picking out there.
Well, is it flat picking? I guess it is. I mean, we were freaked out about great drummers. It meant a lot to us in that band. And one of the funnest things about listening to music with Tony and, say, Todd, especially the two of them together, listening to a rhythm section, whether it's Elvin Jones and Jimmy Garrison or Paul Motion, any of these classic jazz rhythm sections, that was what we were all about. It's all about rhythm when you're around Tony. I know that some of his harmonic stuff can be pentatonic, and he sometimes plays the same things over multiple tunes. He had to work out the picking pattern, of course, because of his unusual down-up strokes. So,
yeah.
But his time thing, I'm sure you talked to a lot of guys about it, how important that was. It stayed with me my whole life, that experience of the intensity of playing with him, turning the microscope up so high, especially in the recording studio, trying to get things really right. And Grisman too. But Tony had a kind of buoyancy about how he played that bubbled in a way that was just so, I don't know how to describe it. It's just like a thing you wanted to be a part of. And it was a thing you didn't want to screw up when it was happening in the room. That was for sure. It was very delicate. And you just wanted to make sure, like, if Tony's happy, I'm happy. And he didn't communicate very much. He was from that older school.
Yeah, there's so many tunes that have these odd arranged things, or these interesting chord changes, or these like 2/4 measures and stuff. Often listening to it, I wonder how much of this was arranged, how much of this was talked about. And without fail, when you talk to people that were actually there, they're like, oh, we didn't talk about really any of it.
Well, I mean, the tune was the tune, right? I mean, I listened to Neon Tetra just before getting with you today, just to go back and check out some of that stuff, because that's pretty complicated. It's got a lot of those kind of moves in it.
Yeah.
And that was the tune, we had to learn it. The A, the B, the C.
Cut it on like a tape for you, and you would take it home and figure it out, or would you do it in person?
Oh, no.
How would you do that?
We would do it in person. Yeah. I don't think I ever recorded anything, and I never saw a piece of music in all my years of playing with Grisman and Rise. Might have seen a chord chart. We were hanging. We were just hanging out together. And it's hard for Tony to learn other people's music, So we had to really go over it a lot with him. Some people are quicker at that, just taking on somebody else's skin. That wasn't Tony's thing. So if you were going to try and show him one of your tunes, it was going to be hand to hand, just back and forth over this thing until he could really physicalize it, really get it in his body.
You were talking about, when you go back and listen to these recordings, you can hear that, you misunderstood, some kind of concept or something. You made a choice that maybe you wouldn't make today. Maybe that's a nice way of saying it. One of my favorite things that Tony does all the time when you listen to him play over interesting chord changes, he pairs this strange pentatonic scale with an interesting chord. So normally we'd expect like G major pentatonic, right? But Tony will have these moments. I think Swing 51 is full of them, Where, for instance, you have a C major 7 chord, and Tony reaches for a G major pentatonic, which is brilliant. It sounds great, right? The G major pentatonic has that major 7 of the C major 7 chord in it, right? And it lacks the root of the
But it
C
also
major
has
7
like
chord.
a sharp 11. This is a major 7th, or is it? So it also has the 9 and
Yeah, right. It's a very hip
this
sound.
tension.
Yeah.
Well, that was, I'm guessing that he might have gotten some of that from John Carlini, because I don't know anything about their relationship. Like, I never got to see that. By the time I got out there, John was gone and had to gig with the SKYPE or something. So he obviously the two of them hung a lot, and he showed Tony all those jazz chord forms, and probably talked a lot about pentatonics and how to use them. I mean, Tony was listening to a lot of super advanced jazz, and so he had a lot of tolerance for musical tension within the thing. He would just move things up by half steps. Just great. Vite Buba, he called it. Whether that was inspired by McCoy or whoever. But, again, all that stuff was, it wasn't so much about the what, it was always about the how. It was always about tone and timing. And he believed in the magic of the music, that there was something beyond what you could even talk about.
I never got to meet Tony or talk to Tony. What you were talking about with the magic, I think I missed that for a long time. And I was so interested in the nuts and bolts. And I've transcribed, hundreds of these, and I've analyzed hundreds of these, just trying to understand, in my mind, like, what's the genius of Tony Rice? People started paying me to write down these breaks for them, right? Because I've done so many. They're like, oh, will you write down this one or that one?
So you've dealt with the what? Plenty.
Yeah, plenty. And I started getting people asking me to write down Shenandoah, right?
Okay. Well, how can you?
Well, yeah, and I started turning down people, and I won't say, but people have offered me large sums of money. One day I said yes to someone, and I wrote out, it's a true story, I wrote out like the first 8 lines or 8 measures, and I sent it to them, and I said, you know what, I can't do it, but you can have this on the house. And now whenever people ask for it, I tell them, let's let Tony keep that secret. If you want to sit down and you want to learn that thing yourself, good on you for doing the hard work and learning. I haven't done it, great that you learned all of it, you earned it. I don't feel like I can just give that one away.
Very
destroying the last great Tony Rice mystery, How do you play Shenandoah?
And is it a mystery?
Well,
what is it that is so evasive about it? Or is it just being played so beautifully that to write it down is almost sacrilegious?
You're right. I'm still concerned with the what, right? But there isn't actually a secret note in there, right? There isn't a secret chord no one's ever heard before. That's not what's happening. No, it's an incredible performance. You're right. That's what's amazing.
Yeah, and I think that's what we have to remember, that when we put on those records, whether it's Skaggs and Rice, I mean, he's just playing root fifth in the guitar and barely touching the upper strings. And yet, why is it ripping our heart out? Why is it grabbing us by the throat and saying, there is no other way that this can be done but this way, right here, right now? And yet it's so simple. I think it's important to remember that about Tony, that a lot of it was simple. And unless he was touching that part of the music making experience, he wasn't happy. I mean, all the great musicians have that. Let's face it, Jerry Douglas, when he hits one note, you just go, oh my God, it's just a note. But why is it going right into my skull and through my heart and making my feet dance right now? What is that? And that's, it's important to remember that when we have all this access, like you said, about transcribing a solo. There it is. Okay, go play it. Well, good luck.
Before Mike Marshall and I dive into talking about improvisation, I wanted to give you the information on where Mike teaches. Artistworks is an online music lesson service with over 40 world-renowned master musicians who are not only geniuses, but also incredible instructors. The beauty of Artistworks is that you can learn any instrument in any genre, from bluegrass to jazz, blues, and more. Artistworks uses their patented video exchange learning platform, which you've probably heard about. It allows students to submit questions to the master faculty in the form of a video, and instructors create personal video responses with guidance and help. These responses are available to you and all of your fellow students, so there's a ton of extra instruction to dive into. So if you want to take lessons from Mike Marshall, you can find him on Artistworks, along with a ton of other great teachers. Head over to their website and use the code Marcel35 to receive 35% off any school or subscription. Let's get back to the interview. You know, I would meet these other musicians when I was just barely learning how to improvise. These other musicians would tell me all of these smart things and all of this theory, which I understood. I understood the lingo. They'd be like, oh, you know, you have a dominant chord. You need to play like Lydian with the flat 7. It's called Lydian dominant. It's so hip. You know, whenever you got a weird dominant chord, you know, play that. And then I go to play it and it would sound, you know, stupid and wrong. And I realized, you know, in retrospect, looking back at myself in that moment, that what I couldn't do was play a line. I couldn't make a musical statement, you know. So people kept giving me like bricks, and they were like, build a wall, but I didn't know how to, you know, put the bricks together.
There you go. That's very interesting. Yeah. There's all these steps to getting into a style, obviously, you know. First is that there are all those great melodies, you know, that you have to kind of learn the tune.
Yeah.
And once you've got all that kind of in your language, then you have something to work with, and pulling those pieces apart and rearranging them in a quote unquote solo. I mean, how many of us are really soloing? We're not really inventing new things when we solo anyway.
Uh-oh. Yeah.
We're really taking cards and slipping them into different slots. And Tony's a great example of that, of course.
I think people, for instance, people sit down and they think, I'm going to learn a bunch of Tony Rice licks, right? And they learn like, and they're like, I'm going to learn the next Tony Rice lick. I'm going to learn the next one. And they don't realize that to like Tony, all of those are the same lick.
That's right.
They kind of like all do the same thing, all the same job, the same part of the neck, same kind of sound. What you should be doing is learning that first lick and thinking to yourself, what are all the variations I can come up with of that lick? Right? You don't have to learn all the variations Tony found. You can find your own variations, right? How else can I play that lick?
How do you do that? You know, that's very interesting. I'm teaching. I'm sure you think of fiddle tunes the same way. How do you vary a fiddle tune? Thing is that all these fiddle tunes are built on 4 phrases usually.
I just had a workshop about this. Yeah.
Yeah. The next phrase, da 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 da. Go back to the first phrase. Da, 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 da. Now the ending tag. So yeah, same thing you were saying. Like come up with a lot of variations for that first opening. You know.
Yeah.
And what about target notes? Do you ever talk about target notes? Like if
you
play, I mean, to me, you can usually break these fiddle tunes down to their most bonehead skeletal structure. Like there's a quarter note version of every fiddle tune that the drunk guy does. You know?
Yeah.
Right? I mean, you're basically walking up the scale. And so how many ways can you get there?
Yeah.
Whatever. So that's your opening phrase. Can you vary that, but have those target notes as your landing points? And then now let's go to the next phrase and do the same thing.
Yeah. No, I love that approach. A lot of times I'll get people to vocalize it too, because sometimes the duration, the length of time is tough to grab onto, especially if you're real new to this.
It is composition, you know. That's what Grisman always said. We're not really improvising, you know. You got to have a moment to think up something to play. So that's compositional time, right? I mean, eventually you become very free, but it's not immediate.
No. And you have to kind of study these melodies to think of how they work. I make people do stuff like this. Ba ba doo da ba doo da da doo doo. da ba doo doo da da doo doo da 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 doo doo da da.
Your
doo,
landing
da,
note.
doo, da. That's how the A part works, right?
Same thing. It's like you
Yeah.
got to get there. You
Yeah.
can do it any old way you want.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. To take that concept further, you know, how I really love to build on that concept. However you analyze the piece of music, that is what becomes your jungle gym, right? That's what you play with. So, for instance, if you look at the B part of Salt Creek, that's a different kind of phrase. And we can argue about how you might analyze it. But this is how I might analyze it, right? I might look at the B part of Salt Creek and see this. Right? I would think that, like, oh, maybe the B part is kind of almost like a call and response thing. It's like, tell me about the chord, give me a line. All right, tell me about the chord, play me a line. And I can prove that hypothesis by, you know, picking a different chord shape and picking a different melody fragment, right?
There you go.
Right.
Still
So that's
in
the beginning of Old Train, right? And it still sounds like Salt Creek, right?
Right. That's brilliant. I love it. That's what I tell people. Very similar things. You get into rhythmic variation. You can get into syncopations and chromaticism and arpeggios and all these things within that concept. And in the end, it does boil down to just like imagination, right? Can you think of something to do? And if you can't, well, then learning other people's solos is a great tool, because that does get another language up under your fingers. And, well, what did Sam Bush do on that solo? I love his ending riff to such and such. Let me go learn that. We can take it and make it our own.
You said something that I really liked in there. You said, you know, can you just think of the next thing? Can you just solve the problem quickly, right? Over and over again.
Right.
Can you just find a solution? It made me think of watching good musicians solve problems in everyday life. They tend to be really quick problem solvers if they're good improvisers. I'm not saying that every improviser is super handy, like they're going to fix your car or something, but I've been on the road with these guys, and when there's a problem, someone has a solution real quick. It's just like improvising, you know?
Just to expand on that, I have to say that a lot of these musicians that I've hung out with are some really brilliant cats. I mean, just really smart dudes on many levels. And bringing it back to Tony, he was really smart. He was really not only smart but wise and super sensitive. He did not, what do they say? He didn't have a lot of patience for foolishness. If somebody was not smart, he didn't want to hang around. Suffer fools gladly, is that what they say? No.
Yeah.
Zero tolerance for that. And so I hear what you're saying. And maybe it does come from improvising, or maybe because they're creative beings, they are good at solving.
Right, you've created a chicken and the egg, yeah. I'll tell you a funny Tony Rice story. Some kids on my YouTube channel told me that I should try solving Rubik's Cubes.
Okay.
They said, like, if you like improvising, if you like music, like, you might enjoy that process too. It's very similar. I didn't really believe them. And then I tried it. So yeah, I got kind of obsessed with it, and I have a bunch of Rubik's Cubes over here. And
that was something I never went down that rabbit hole. Oh my God!
Get this, my big goal was I wanted to solve a normal Rubik's Cube in like under a minute. That was my thing. And I got to the point where I did it a time or two, but it wasn't consistent. So I'm reading the John Carlini article that he wrote after Tony passed, and it says like, oh yeah, Tony Rice could also solve a Rubik's Cube in under a minute. And I was like,
oh my God,
I didn't even know that.
No way. I didn't know that either. But I got to say, another guy who could do that was Josh Bell, the violin.
Really?
We worked with a classical musician.
Yeah, I saw him when I was like 16. I wanted to ask you about if people don't know it, people haven't been following what you're up to. There's this whole like new chapter of your playing that is this like Brazilian music, like choro music. It's almost like you just picked another genre and you're like, all right, I'm gonna figure out all of
Yeah.
this now. And you've already done so many things in your career. I mean, we're really only talking about Grisman today, and we're jumping over here, but that's a lot. I mean, your brain must be exploding, man.
I'm trying. I do have to say, I'm trying to learn German right now, and I'm not sure there's enough room in the hard drive for all of this stuff.
This is what I'm talking about. You're a great example of the thing. You're over there being humble, and then you're like, oh, and also I'm learning German.
No, it's learning me. My kids won't let me speak it around them. I can go shopping, like I can do the basics. I know the names for all the vegetables, and I can understand the money, and I can say, "Can I have one of those, please?" But beyond that, I get lost very easily. Music has always been something that I've studied. Maybe that's why I love being a teacher, because to me, that's what music is to learn. And from the first day I got into bluegrass, I was coming at it as an outsider. We moved from Pennsylvania to Florida, and I had this teacher that started this teenage bluegrass band, and we went to our first festival in Livonia, Georgia. And I just dove into that well. Came back with a stack of LPs and started learning all the stuff I could learn from it. And so music has always been this thing that I took like, okay, well, that's wonderful. And then one thing leads to another. Through bluegrass, you discover Stephen Grappelli and Django Reinhardt and swing music, and you see the connection between all those styles. And then you move to California, joined David Grisman's band. Of course, David's already broken the Cosmic Aoga open, creating his music. And so you're going down that rabbit hole for a while. And then he's got a cassette tape of this crazy Brazilian mandolin player, and Jacob de Mandolin. We used to listen to it in the car. And I did not understand anything about the music at that point. None of us did. We didn't know what we were hearing, because we never heard of a 7-string guitar or a cavaquinho or a pandeiro. Pandeiro is like this tambourine type instrument they use. We just heard all this jangling in the background, and we heard the 7-string guitar player. We thought, boy, that bass player, it's kind of weird. He's like, goes up real high sometimes and plays all these licks, and then he disappears. What's going on with this bass player? I just fell down into being in the Bay Area. There was a chance to kind of get to know something about the music to a very little degree at that point. And so on a trip to Brazil with the Turtle Island String Quartet, came back with stacks of CDs and just dove way into it. I mean, for 2 years, I don't think I did anything else but learn those melodies. And then classical music has always been a part of my world, and I always studied it. It would be many more years later before I would get brave enough. I actually played it with Grisman. It was my little solo bit. The Modern Mandolin Quartet, I always wanted to play more classical music. And of course, as a mandolin player, you don't have a chance to unless you do it yourself, because they're not going to hire you in a string quartet or an orchestra. So it was a great opportunity for me to dive down that rabbit hole. What is more wonderful than playing the second mandolin part of a Mendelssohn quartet or a Debussy piano piece? I mean, I didn't get to play no Debussy piano music unless you got to start a band to do that.
Yeah.
And you get to experience all those harmonies. And my hope is that it would just spill over into my language. That extends to living with Katerina now and coming over here and experiencing this whole German mandolin. Has been so big over here, mandolin orchestras anyway. Of course, it's a very different scene. They don't play chords.
The mandolin orchestra thing also took over in America, but it died out, right? It didn't have sort of staying power. And I guess what the Americans did with all their leftover mandolins was figure out how to play chords.
Yeah, it was an upper middle class thing to do. And then it fell into the hands of folk musicians and rural folks, and they figured out, oh, this is tuned just like the fiddle. Typically became the instrument that the little kid played. And then, we've spent the whole century working our way through all of that out the other side, And that has brought, getting back to our original idea that sometimes not knowing stuff can be great. Bill Monroe found the chop chord and
Yeah.
figured out what an F5 could do in a band situation, and that gave birth to all of this.
Maybe that's the theme of our conversation, or the big takeaway is that maybe you shouldn't be taking the time to look up the answer to every question. Sometimes you...
I think was it Hartford that said style is based on limitation? And let's face it, all these terminologies that we learn are kind of meaningless. The music comes first. I remember a time with David Greer in Psychocrats when we had these charts, we had written all this stuff out, Daryl and I, there's this chord, I don't know what the hell it was, G7, G minor 7, flat 5 or something. David says, all right, hold on a minute. Somebody wrote their phone number after my G chord. What is all this shit? I said, oh, no, David. That chord you do when you bar these three strings and then you put this other bass note under it? Oh, yeah, that's that. He said, well, why didn't you tell me?
Oh, man.
So as soon as he heard it and he understood it from that perspective, like what is G over F?
Yeah.
Is that G over F or is that F?
G7.
The 7, is that G7? The what can get in the way sometimes.
I mean, who knows if it really was a G minor 7 flat 5 chord? It could have been an E flat 9 chord. Could have just been
There you
rootless.
go. It could have been. And Tony was really a good example of that because he would play things and then he'd tell you what it was. Daryl and I would be like, maybe that's what it is. But I think what he means is this. And then we'd play the sound and he'd go, yeah, that's it.
Everyone is out there looking for interesting musical ideas, or at least we should be. Right? And then there's a guy pushing up his glasses, walking behind you, trying to categorize everything, right? That's how it should work. If you're the guy categorizing things and you're also trying to be creative, you're doing the wrong job, right? You should be out there doing the thing, right? Let someone else take the notes.
That's probably true. But here we are, we're teachers, so we have to, it's our job to break it down and say, but I take it on an individual basis. I get all these videos on Artistworks from all these different levels of players. And so I just try to find that magical place where this person obviously knows this amount of things. And here's one little area, if they worked on thinking about this, it might put them to that sound they're looking for. Do you do the online teaching too, or is?
Yeah, I teach one-on-one lessons. But I used to teach a lot more, but now I manage some other teachers. They do a lot of teaching. I kind of cut my schedule down so I can do YouTube. So I can hang out with you, Mike.
Well, it's amazing what you're doing. I mean, you're just creating these beautiful things that tell the story and give a lot of information. That's what I love about my site, is that everything I've done is up there. If anyone cares to sift through it, there's 9,000 video exchanges I'm up to.
You ever go back and just watch all of those in order just for old time's sake?
Are you kidding me? Oh, Lordy. I've always loved teaching and I've always loved studying. I mean, talk about rabbit holes. Now I'm into this. My COVID project was all the Bach cello suites on the Mando cello. I did the fifth. That's out. So I got the sixth now, the Devilish Sixth, because it's written for a 5-string cello, the last cello suite. Most cellists play it on a normal cello and just go way up the neck. I'm playing it up the neck on the Montleone, and I'm up to the next to the last fret, 2 frets from the end on his Mando cello. And I'm going to go with a little bit lighter A string, and I think I can get it to record well.
I can't imagine that amount of work. Yes, everyone, please check out Mike Marshall on Artistworks, and please check out his wild COVID project. It certainly beats yours.
Well,
it's great.
I don't know what it is about these obsessions. I mean, I suppose it's obsessive compulsive behavior, just pointed, really. And then probably all musicians are that way. You're obviously a psycho case for the same.
Yeah.
How many solos have you transcribed?
I don't even want to talk numbers.
Oh, do you have them all in a book?
Almost all of them are, and that's not even true. I would say maybe 3/4 of them are on my website. Yeah, there's probably close to 1,000 on there. I used to do live streams too, where I would, go live. People would tune in and they would request songs, and then I'd pull up the song and I'd write it down. I tried to do 2 or 3 a night.
Oh yeah, I
I'd try
saw
to help
some of
people.
those. Those are great, man. Really cool.
It's kind of scary to do that kind of thing live, right?
Watching you transcribe, yeah.
You don't want to look dumb. You want to look real smart.
Exactly. Oh, Lordy. Well, I have a question for you then. You write these things down and then people go on your site and buy them and they read them. Is that truly as valuable as they should transcribe it and get it by ear under their fingers instead of looking at it on the page?
I think that they're cheating themselves by not transcribing it themselves. And
Because they're learning a piece of classical music
yeah, I know.
if they're reading it.
I've had some people reach out to me and say, hey, will you transcribe this break? And what I'll tell them is, hey, you should look at this other break and learn how to play it, and then you can figure out the one you want on your own. This is the stepping stone. If you learn Tony Rice's Blue Ridge Cabin Home, he uses all the same licks in Biggs by Camera. Go figure it out yourself. Right?
Well,
It lets people, kind of sneak in, right? They get to tiptoe into learning things on their own, right? Well, Mike, it's been so good to have you.
really great to meet you and hang.
Yeah.
Good little dialogue here. Fun. Thank you for all you're doing.